Nonverbal behaviour is inherently communicative, and we use it and interpret it to convey emotions and attitudes and even status. The way that we adjust our bodies, tones and gestures, however, can differ between cultures. In this lecture, we're going to discuss cross-cultural similarities in nonverbal behaviour as well as differences. Paul Ekman, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, an expert in emotional expression, there he is looking foxy, provided evidence to suggest that facial expressions of basic human emotions, so this is happiness, anger, disgust, sadness, surprise and fear, can be recognised cross-culturally. In one famous study, for example, New Guinean participants who'd had almost no contact with Western cultures were shown pictures of Westerners making different facial expressions. It turned out that they labelled them pretty much the same as did Westerners themselves. When asked to display the same emotions in turn, these were accurately decoded by college students in the United States. In fact, blind and deaf children who haven't seen or heard nonverbal displays are observed to laugh, smile, frown, stomp their feet in anger, cry, and even cover their faces when they're ashamed. Researchers also speculate that some animals display basic emotions, especially anger, in similar ways that we as humans do. All this work converges to suggest that an inbuilt, cross-cultural and at times even cross-species nonverbal display of emotion exists. The two tricky ones to pick up on seem to be fear and surprise, which are often mistaken for one another or other emotions. Okay, cool, there are a lot of things that we do that are sort of the same as one another. But Paul Ekman also notes that what emotion is appropriate to display and when can change culture to culture. He describes something called display rules that govern when and how people are expected to non-verbally communicate. In an early study, Japanese and American participants were asked to watch this really stressful film, so like The Room, for example. They did so in one of two conditions, either by themselves or with the experimenter present. When watching by themselves, the Japanese and American participants actually acted the same way, displaying like facial fear, distress and disgust. When the experimenter was present, however, the Japanese participants masked their negative feelings, smiling at the distressing moments rather than displaying negative emotion. This was early evidence of the role of cultural display rules. Research since then has shown that in general, Americans, relative to Japanese people, think that displaying heaps and heaps of emotion in all sorts of situations is okay. But culture doesn't just vary between countries. David Matsumoto, a psychologist who is expert in nonverbal behaviour, gesture, culture, emotion, he's been hugely influential in this area. Some of his work has shown that within one cultural context, the ethnic groups we belong to can actually shape how appropriate we think it is for us to display emotion. In a 1993 study, Matsumoto studied display rules in Black, Asian, White and Hispanic Americans. Participants were shown photos of faces expressing emotion, and they were then asked to indicate how appropriate it would be to display these emotions in different settings. So, for example, alone, in public, with close friends, with family members, with casual acquaintances, and with children. Relative to white Americans, Black, Asian and Hispanic participants rated the display of negative emotions like contempt, disgust, fear and sadness as less appropriate. Research on cross-cultural nonverbals has since looked at cultural differences in how we communicate with others through nonverbal behaviours such as vocal tone and body language. A recent study by Sauter and colleagues looked at how we convey emotion through tone. In this research, they compared English and Himba participants from Namibia and found that it's pretty easy to distinguish different negative emotions from tone across cultures. We seem to display negativity the same way. On the other hand, the way that we displayed different positive emotions with tone varied quite a bit. McCarthy and colleagues studied eye gaze in reference to thinking in one study. They discovered that Canadians and Trinidadians look up when thinking, much like I do when I look back at these lectures and see my thinking eyes. On the other hand, Japanese people tend to look down when thinking. Myriad other cultural differences in nonverbals have been observed. For example, in one study, researchers found that Italian immigrants to America used their full body to emphasise points, gesticulating wildly, whereas Jewish immigrants used smaller, closer to the body movements to emphasise their points. Interestingly, by the second generation, these differences were gone. In Japan, the head nod is used heavily to indicate paying attention, but it doesn't necessarily indicate agreement as it often does in the West. In India, the head bobble or wobble has a whole host of meanings depending on how it is done and to who. In the United States, white Americans have been observed to spend a lot of time looking when they're listening, but less when they are talking. Whereas, on average, black Americans have been observed spending more time looking while talking and less time looking while listening. In many Western settings, pauses in conversations are uncomfortable and we sort of feel they need to be filled. In some Aboriginal groups, however, pauses emphasise respect, listening and agreement, and filling a silence quickly actually signals the opposite of respect. Eye contact is another one here, where in Western societies, really direct and prolonged eye contact signals engagement and respect. Whereas in many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups, averted gaze is actually a strong signal of respect. This picture here is from Yolngu Boy, which is an excellent movie that deals with some of these cross-cultural issues. As you can probably infer, different normative nonverbals can lead different groups to misinterpret one another's intentions. In this example, through eye contact, with both parties adopting a mode of gaze that appears rude to the other. So to sum things up, cross-culturally, we clearly feel a similar range of nice and horrid emotions. And there's evidence to suggest that our facial expressions for core emotions are pretty similar. With that said, there are different display rules across cultures that determine when and how we should express these emotions. Other nonverbals we use in conversation differ cross-culturally as well, both across and within nations. When I was 17, the age that some of you may be now, I went on an exchange to America for a full year. Beforehand, I had to read all these leaflets about how to adjust to different cultural norms. The company had this mantra which was, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just different. Oh, and they also had this rule that I was not permitted to buy a scooter while overseas. But anyway, this mantra turned out to be pretty useful. I found then, as I found now, that approaching cross-cultural differences with respect and interest makes interactions better and generally life more fun.